I'm Jenny Fish from One Big Happy Yarn Company. We want to be your yarn shop no matter where you are. Welcome to our sock knit along. In this episode, we're going to go over supplies, basics on reading a pattern, making a gauge swatch in the round, and how to count your stitches. Let's get started. I am so excited to share this sock with you. The pattern is Knitting Pure and Simple Beginner's Lightweight Sock by Diane Susie. When I was preparing for this project, I decided, what is it that the beginning knitter would want to know about a sock? And it dawned on me, the anatomy of a sock. It's sometimes something that gets missed, and I just want to take a moment to go over that with you and show you all the different parts of the sock. We start out with the cuff, and that's this area right here. This pattern is a top-down sock pattern, which means it starts at the cuff and goes down the rest of the sock. This one is done in a rib. The rib is a stretchy line of ribbing that goes around. This is made so that you can slip it over your foot, and then as it goes up your leg, it snugs back to your leg. We go down into the leg portion of the sock. This is completely customizable depending on how long or short you want your sock to be. From there, we go to the heel. We go from knitting in the round to knitting flat when we get to this heel portion, and that means we go from going in a circle to 2 needles going back and forth. Then we do a little bit of shaping here, and I'll show you how to do that. Once we're done with that, we go back to knitting in the round by picking up these stitches right across here and do this decrease right along here that forms the gusset to our sock. Once we finish the decreases, then we go back to our normal amount of stitches. Then we knit straight through all the way around in a circle till we get to the end of our foot. And then we do some more decreases to finish off with our toe. And then we do a cinched toe at the end. And that is the basic anatomy of a sock. Let's go over some of the supplies we'll be using to make these socks. We are using the Alegria from Manos del Uruguay. Some of them are space-dyed, some of them are solid, and I want to go over that information with you. It is also 75% superwash merino wool and 25% polyamide. Now with the space-dyed, I want to go back and explain that to you a little bit. We're using the Colorado Riverway for our socks. And if you see here, there's chunks of the yarn that are done in different colors. Each of these sections is dyed specifically by the artisan. And each of the artisan that makes these, they sign these little cards here. And this one was made in Dragon by Letitia. And I think that is so super cool that every one of them is signed by the person that makes them. Because each one is made individually, they're all going to be a little bit different. Now, the space dyeing technique, the colors are planned out where they're going to be in the length of the yarn. For this one, when we knit our socks, it just so happened to be that every other row was a different color based on the length apart the dye was put on the yarn hank. Now, when I was making these socks, I kind of had an idea. I wanted to try something. So I took a ball of yarn and I weighed it, and I divided that in half, and I made 2 yarn balls. And I made sure that the colors were going in the same direction from both yarn balls. And when I was knitting the sock, I would knit 2 rounds with one ball, the next 2 rounds with another ball. And what that created was a little bit of stacking so that my stripes were a little bit thicker. So here's the one that is straight from the ball, and then here's the one with a little bit more stacking. If you feel comfortable with that, go ahead and try it. But for this knit along, we're going to stick to the one ball and go ahead and do it this way. But it was just a neat little trick that I wanted to point out and tell you guys about. It was fun. Now, I also want to go over superwash and what that means. Superwash is a chemical that's put on the yarn. It helps the yarn resist felting. That's all it means. And the polyamide that's in there is a synthetic fiber that gives more structure. So these socks are going to go through a lot of wear and tear. They're on your feet, they're in and out of shoes, they're walking across the floor. That synthetic fiber gives the yarn a little bit more strength and durability. Now, when you're washing, that's another question everybody always asks about, you know, how do you wash it? It's wool. Do I have to hand wash it? These, you can throw them in a garment bag on delicate in your washer and then lay them flat to dry. But when you make your gauge swatch, and we'll go over that, I would say treat your gauge swatch how you're going to treat your socks, just to see how they're going to turn out when they're clean. And that'll kind of give you a direction on how you want to prepare your socks and clean them. Now, we've got our yarn done. What else are we going to be using? We're going to need knitting needles. So for these, we are using a size 2 double-pointed needle, also known as DPNs. You'll hear that terminology quite a bit. I kind of use both of them when I'm talking. So DPN equals double-pointed needle. You will see me use both the 7-inch and the 5-inch of the US size 2 double-pointed needles. Honestly, it's knitter's preference. Sometimes beginners find the longer ones to be easier to work with at first because the 5 inches are just a little bit shorter. But again, personal preference, whatever you choose. Next, we're going to go over our knit check. We'll use this when we're checking our gauge after we've made our gauge swatch. It has a little ruler on here. And also with the double pointed needles, this one other little tip I want to show. Sometimes you can't really read what size they are. If you're ever wondering what these little holes are on this knit check, you slide your needle through, and if it doesn't go through, it's not the right size. If it goes through perfectly, then that is the size 2, and or is the correct size. As you can see here, there's the number 2. So this is a size 2. If I go through the 3, I have a bunch of wiggle room. That's just another way to check your needle size because sometimes you can't read it on there. And then we have our locking stitch markers. We'll be using a few of these as we go through the project. We have this cute little guy here. This is our row counter. We'll be using this when we get to the heel flap. This, you push the little button at the top and the number moves. You can also manually move them back to 0 if you need to. And then this is great for when the kids are around. You slide it over to lock and they can't accidentally push that button and change your count. That's our row counter. We have a pair of snips here, some scissors. We'll need that to clip our yarn. And then we have this bent tip tapestry needle that'll help us weave in our ends at the end. And then these cute little guys, these are called needle wranglers, and these are fairly new to me. I hadn't used them before and I was asked to test them out, and they're really clever. It did take me a minute to figure out how to use them, but it's real basic. You just slide the tip of your needles into the little slots provided like that, and it holds your needles together. And you can get 4 on here. I'll show you later as we go along, but just want to show you the basic premise of these. There you go. Keeps them together. Your worker's in the middle. So these are our needle wranglers. And then we also have some One Big Happy sock blockers. First of all, when you get them, they have this paper on the back. Once you get the paper off, it doesn't leave any residue or anything, so you're good to go. You slide this piece into this shoe size that corresponds to what you're blocking for your sock. There's a little arrow there, and we'll go over more of that in detail as we get to blocking our sock, but I just wanted to let you know that we do have the One Big Happy sock blockers. And we also have the pattern. This pattern will come in your kit, and you can get that from onebighappy.com. It's the Knitting Pure and Simple Beginner's Lightweight Sock by Diane Susie. We have reached out to her and let her know that we were going to be doing a tutorial with her pattern, and she gave us the go-ahead, so thank you, Diane. We appreciate that. I want to go over how to read a pattern because sometimes people get a little confused. This pattern is a super easy pattern to understand. It's set up in sections, and each section is bolded, like we have a size, material. The sizes for this pattern come in women's sizes or men's sizes, and the men and women's sizes is basically a wider sock. So if you have a wider foot, you may want to go with the larger size for the man, a narrower foot, go with the woman's size. Me personally, I wear a size 8.5 to 9, so I went with the women's size and it fits me just fine. And then we have the gauge and the abbreviations. I want to stop here for a second and kind of go over abbreviations. This is a guide that kind of tells you how to understand the shorthand that's in the pattern. Some of it for us knitters that have been going on for a long time, we kind of know right away. But I do have to say that every now and then I get stumped on one. And as I was reading this pattern, I saw one that said INS, and I just couldn't figure it out for a few minutes. I was like, what? And I okay, I got to go back to the abbreviation guide. And when I did, I found out it was for inches, and I'm like, oh, I should have known that. I just hadn't seen it in a pattern in a while, so it didn't dawn on me. But always, if you see something, you know, K means knit, P means purl. Those are kind of standard, but you'll see one every now and then that's a little different. Don't hesitate. Go back to your abbreviation guide. It's going to tell you what that means and how to do that particular task. So after we go through the abbreviations, we get right down to the pattern. Now, because this is a sized pattern, that means that there's more than one size in our pattern or in our instructions. The way they break these out is, and this is standard for most patterns, you'll have a number, and then afterwards you'll have a set of other numbers. Sometimes they'll put them in parentheses, a comma, and then maybe brackets. What that indicates is that this pattern, these instructions are all the same, but depending on what size you're making is what number you look at. Now for me, because I'm making the woman's, my number is the very first one. And so what I would suggest doing is going through and circling that throughout the entire pattern, and maybe even crossing out that other number so that you don't get confused. If you're making a man's size, his number is going to be in the parentheses. So you might want to circle that one and cross out the first one. And go through your entire pattern. Anytime you see those two different numbers, circle the one you want, cross out the one you don't want. Trust me, it makes a difference when you get there. So after we get through the cast on area, it tells us how to turn the heel, the gusset, how to shape that, which we'll talk about. I'll walk you through every step of the way on this project. I've got you covered. We'll shape the toe and finish up blocking the sock. So that is the pattern. That's how to read the pattern. If you do have any additional questions on reading a pattern, feel free to leave a comment below and we'll get back to you on that, because I know it can get a little tricky, but I want to be here to help you. So once you have your kit, you're going to want to make a gauge swatch. And this is not just so that you can make sure you're matching up with the pattern and the gauge that's required for the pattern, but it's also so you can test out the yarn to make sure that it makes a fabric that you want as a sock. Now, because the sock is knit in the round, you want to do your gauge swatch in the round. And here I have my gauge swatch, but you'll notice that it's flat and has all these little ends on the sides. I want to show you how to do this, and that's super simple, and it saves time and it saves your yarn. I mimicked knitting in the round so that I didn't have to purl, because I'm not going to be purling when I make this sock. So in order to mimic knitting in the round, I'm using these double pointed needles. So there's points on both ends. Don't worry about it. We're just using 2 right now. They will stay on here. But the purpose of this is so that I can slide my work back and forth. And I'll show you how I do that. I just finished knitting off of this end. I'm going to take my working yarn and float it across the back. As you can see, these are all just hanging there. I float it across the back, and then I knit this first stitch right here. I will knit all the way across this row as if I was knitting in the round, again, mimicking this knitting in the round process. Now I do want to talk about this gauge swatch real quick. Sometimes you wonder, how many stitches do I cast on to make for my swatch? Well, in this pattern, it is 8 stitches per inch. And to get a good gauge, you really want at least 4 inches of work. So I knew that that was going to be 32, because the 8 times 4 is 32. And then I wanted a little cushion on both sides of that, because I knew that these end stitches, they're floating. They're not going to be good to count for gauge. So I added an extra 10. So I cast on 42 for this gauge swatch and knit a few rounds, mimicked rounds to give it some structure. And then because this pattern doesn't call for a row gauge, because everything is done in inches, it doesn't really matter how many inches of knitting that I do. The more important part is the stitches. But again, I want a good chunk of fabric here to test out, because not only am I testing the stitches to make sure how many stitches per inch I have, I'm testing out the yarn to see what kind of fabric I end up with, just to make sure that that is a fabric I want on my feet or that I want for my socks. And then also, when we're done with this swatch, we're going to wash it how we would wash our socks. And we want to make sure that it's going to stand up and perform the way that we want it to. All right, so here I am. I've got a couple more stitches here now that I'm at the end of this row. This is where the double pointed needles come in handy, because now I can just slide it back to the other side of that needle, float my yarn across the back like I'm mimicking knitting in the round. No purling here, which makes it a little bit funner sometimes. Okay, and then I just go back and knit again. So I knit this chunk and get it to where I want to get it. That first stitch, don't worry about it because it's going to be loose. You've got this float back here that ain't attached to anything. But, you know, once you're done, it's not going to matter. You have enough stitches going on that it'll hold tight in the center. So once we have that done, we wash it, like I said, wash it how you're going to wash your socks. Wash it before you clip these floats here. Trust me, don't ask me how I know. You want to wait. After you've washed it, before you lay it flat to dry, then you go ahead and you clip those floats, lay it flat to dry. Now you have a good chunk of fabric that you can take your knit check and check your gauge. Like I said, we want 8 stitches per inch. So we're going to come in here, we're going to lay our knit check down. Now we have this window, we can go by this window, or we can look down here and go by these numbers, but we really want to capture that first stitch. And we want to count. I'm going to go with this blue one right here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. We have got 8 stitches per inch. We've met the gauge from the pattern. We are good to go. Now when checking your gauge, remember, if you get too many stitches, you want to use a bigger needle. If you don't have enough stitches, then you're going to want to use a smaller needle. Once you get the gauge that you want, you have the fabric that you like, let's get to knitting. Remember, you can get a kit plus everything you need at onebighappy.com. Click the link in the information box below to learn more. Next week, I'll show you how to cast on and get knitting on DPNs. Be sure to hit the subscribe button below and click the bell to be notified every time we have a new video. Happy knitting!